Hi guys, my name is Melissa Gomez and I'm a junior chemistry major. I'm also a chemistry tutor, so take my advice with some credibility. I just wanted to share with you guys today some things that have helped me in preparing for chemistry classes and also in them when I'm working on problems step by step. So the most important thing, I think, is reaching out as soon as you need help. This could be either your professor's office hours, your teaching assistant's office hours, going to the tutoring center, or PASS sessions. Um, they're called PASS, but it stands for Peer Assisted Study Sessions. Don't feel like don't feel ashamed for needing help. You can't you can't let yourself struggle in these courses until it becomes like too much for you to handle that you finally get help. As soon as a problem arises, try to fix that. Um, and another important thing is always look for other resources online when something's troubling you. If you have trouble visualizing something, for example, just look up a video on YouTube or on Google. And another thing with visualization, although I didn't have a modeling kit in Gen Chem, I had one in Orgo, but when I went back and kind of thought about Gen Chem in terms of the modeling kit, it really helped me visualize things like molecular geometries. So if you can, I would consider getting one even though you don't really need it until Orgo. Lastly, one of the resources that I enjoyed using online was Khan Academy. Um, there's a lot of practice on there. They have videos that you can watch where they work through problems and explain concepts, and then they also give you some practice problems to think about. Okay, so in terms of actually going through problems and preparing for the course, practice problems are key in chemistry. You can't just memorize how to do one specific type of problem because they can change the variables that you're looking for. Um, so obviously do all of your homework, um, but on top of that, I would do all of the problems that my professor recommended. And on top of that, I try to go into the textbook and do the in-chapter step-by-step exercises because they explain why they're doing each step, which is really helpful when you're learning a new concept. Um, to prepare for exams, I would redo all of my recitation worksheets as well as quizzes, and make sure you take advantage of all the practice exam materials that are available because they were given to you for a reason by your professor. They're most likely going to be of a similar difficulty of the exam and similar types of questions and topics. Attend any review sessions if they are available. This also includes PASS sessions. Um, PASS sessions, they go over worksheets together as a group. And another thing I would say is to work in groups with people in your class, but don't rely on the group to get you through the class. Um, okay. When working through problems, I would suggest that you use your understanding of the world to determine if an answer makes sense. So an example that I thought of was if everything else besides pressure and volume are constant in a question. If you squeeze a balloon tightly, you're compressing it, which means you're increasing the pressure, and the balloon got smaller, so the volume decreased. So that's just an application of the ideal gas law, or you might have not learned yet, but P1V1 equals P2V2. Another thing I recommend is thinking of things in terms of being directly proportional or inversely proportional. So if you have two variables x and y and you know that they're equal to a constant, if x is increasing, then y would have to decrease to counteract that. And that's more of a conceptual question that you might be asked. If we increase this, what will happen to this? I also like to draw diagrams to represent what's going on. If you have a solution, you can draw a beaker with that and write out the solution that's in it. And then if you're adding stuff to it, you could draw that in like circles or something. And I would also suggest making a list of all the things that you're given and then determining what it is that you're looking for. I also would suggest solving first for what you're looking for in terms of all of the variables, and then in the end plugging in the numbers just to make sure that you don't actually lose what it is that sorry. Because if you keep calculating all these numbers, you might be rounding a lot and have a lot of error in your answer, and that would give you a slightly different final answer. And it's just easier to keep everything in place if you solve for everything in terms of the variables. Take advantage of the information provided. So sometimes you might be given like a density, for example. You might have to use the density equation, density equals mass over volume, to find either mass or volume, which you'll need later on in your problem. So always be on the lookout for something like that. I would say when solving problems, well, first always write your units and then make sure they cancel. Make sure the units you give in your answer are the same that the question was asking for. When solving, explain to yourself in your head or aloud why you're doing each step that you're doing, and also try to break your tasks into smaller tasks instead of trying to see the big picture all at once. Yeah, do things step by step instead of looking at a problem and trying to figure out exactly how you're going to get to the final answer. And about memorization, memorize what you need to memorize. So like charges based on the periodic table, solubility rules, the different polyatomic ions, important conversions. You might not be given those on the exam, so it's good to know those. And prefixes for your units, so like milligram, microgram, things like that. Make sure you know the exponents involved with those. And use mnemonics if you need to. I use those a lot, especially for solubility rules. And try to make those fun so that you actually memorize them. Another thing I would say is make your own formula sheet as you encounter different formulas in lecture, and make a note of which formula applies to which concept or type of problem, so that when you see that type of problem on the exam, you can immediately think of what type of equation or formula you will be using. Yeah. So that's mainly all of my advice for chemistry lectures. I have a few comments about chemistry lab. I would say try to write down some observations even if you weren't explicitly asked to. They might help you later when you're trying to write your lab report. Another thing I like to do is format my lab report as soon as I can after lab, so that when I actually want to go and work on my lab, I don't have to worry about that aspect of my report. And the most important thing for lab, at least, lab is very time consuming when you're in lab and then outside of lab because of the lab report. Try to get your lab done and printed the night before it's due. And In addition to that, if you print it in advance, I would suggest marking it up as if you were the instructor grading it, because mistakes are much easier to see once it's printed and you're being analytical about what you're writing. So those are all of my tips for how to succeed in chemistry. I hope you guys can apply them to your studies.